Hi, I'm Tiki Twoflower, and welcome to Cosplay Tips with Tiki. Today I'm going to be showing you some sewing basics. There are a lot of different approaches to start to learn how to sew, but today I'm going to show you how to do some basic repairs. I will show you a basic stitch, actually two basic stitches that you can use, like if you have a frayed hem, or if you just want to attach two pieces of fabric together. And I'm also going to show you how to sew on a button, because I think this is a very important skill for any person to have, whether or not they are a cosplayer. Because that's why your shirts come with extra buttons, because buttons do fall off. So to start hand sewing, you need a few supplies, which you can get at any fabric or craft store. I have a pin cushion that contains my pins. You can use many different types of things to contain your pins. I also have sewing needles, which you need to sew. You can use a thimble, which protects your fingers, but I opt to not use thimbles. You need thread to sew with. Typically, you want thread that matches your fabric, but I am not using matching thread today, so that way you can see the stitches that I'm making. This little thing that you may have seen in some of your sewing kits is actually a needle threader, and I will show you how to use that as well as how to thread a needle without one. So let me start off with the sewing needle and our thread. You also need a pair of scissors to cut your thread. All right, so to use a needle threader, you actually first start by putting it through the head of the needle. Then we take our thread and put it through this big opening here, and then pull it back through. And the needle is threaded. Then you want to tie your thread in a knot. To keep the ends from going anywhere. So the most basic of any stitches is just a straight stitch, which can be used, as I was saying, to repair a hem or simply to sew two pieces of fabric together, which I'm going to do right now. It's helpful to use pins to hold your fabric together. Though you don't always have to do this. So a straight stitch starts with just putting the needle through the fabric, pulling it through, pushing it back through the fabric, and continuously repeating that. Trying to work in a straight line. And keep the stitches about even. Now you want to make sure that your knots are on the side of the fabric that won't be showing. And when you're done with your stitch, you need to knot it off again. And you do this by looping your needle through once, and then creating another loop and pulling it through. And then we cut that. Take out our pins. And we have two pieces of fabric that are sewn together. Another method of sewing things together is to use a back stitch, which is a slightly more durable stitch than the straight stitch, although the straight stitch, as I said, will work. And I'll show you, I tend to just thread my needles by trying to shove the thread through, which you can also do. So this is a little bit more advanced of a stitch, so if you don't get this one on the first try, keep practicing. Now, in this case, instead of going straight across the fabric, we're going to go back and forth a little bit. So I'm going to push the thread through and make my first little loop. And then I'm going to push it through again, but instead of continuing in this direction, I'm actually going to go back and push my needle through the hole that I already created. And then I'm going to keep repeating this. And here we have a more continuous stitch that is also continuous on the back. And I can knot this off the same way as I did before by going through once, twice, pulling, and cutting, hopefully. There we go. And now again, we have two pieces of fabric sewn together, but a little bit more securely. So now that we know how to sew two pieces of fabric together, I am going to show you how to sew on a button, which if you can do a straight stitch, you can sew on a button. So I still have some thread left here, so I'm just going to make my knots in the end of the thread. And typically, if you're sewing on a button, you're probably starting off by replacing a button that may be missing. So you'll have an idea of where to place it. Now this time I knotted it a few times, the thread, to make sure that it's nice and secure. So here is my button. And we're going to pretend that it came off of this piece of fabric. And what I'm going to do is actually poke the needle through the button. And I have 4 holes, so I'm simply going to go and poke the needle back through one of the other holes. And I'm going to do this a couple more times. Usually you're not going to be working with a tiny piece of fabric that's going to get caught up like this one is. And then once I do that a few times on the one side, I'm going to try to poke my needle through the other side. And do that again. Another alternative is to do it like an X, which you might see on some of your clothing. Usually you want to try to match it up to the button you're replacing. If you're doing it yourself, you can do it however you want. And when we flip this over, I am going to knot it off again the same way that I did with the regular stitches. And there my button is attached and on there pretty good. And so you have it. 3 different basic techniques to get you started in sewing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.